Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 11 Week 2 Power Rankings. Another week under our belt with some awesome matches. I'm your host, IllLogic, coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant, and as always, I am joined by Steve, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets. We had some amazing matches, so we want to get right into them. Here we go. We are starting off with a hot one that lived up to the hype, the feature match between yours truly and yours truly. A barn burner that ended in a 1-0 victory for the Wobbuffets. 2 turns in, the Wobbuffets were content to trade Heat Train for Rocks, then Starmie for the Revenge, or Light Screen instead, take minimal damage into the Thunderous for Torn. A risky taunt pays off to stop the Thundy's insidious design, which lets Jolteon eat up the Thunderbolt follow-up. Haxorus gets in with the screens though. Kartana is sacked just to get some chip, with Hydreigon cleans up. It's a back and forth. Another risky stay on to bring Terrakion to half, but Rock Polish threatens a full sweep. Hydreigon goes down. Nidoqueen takes a hit, but revenges another go at the light screen, but the Bouffalant have the same screen too from Jolteon. Bronzong versus Crobat, 2 obvious special attack setup mons. They trade just about evenly, and it's down to the wire. Thundy gets the plot, but is drowsy, and light screen goes up before Jolteon bites the dust. Torn KOs Starmie, Thunderous KOs the Queen, and in the 1v1, it's down to Hurricane hitting, but instead the T-Bolt gets the 10% para, letting Thundy outspeed on the final turn for an early game of the season candidate, the 1-0. Next up, we've got the Agrons and the Psyducks, both 1-0, but only the Agrons remain undefeated, the 3-0 going their way, trading status for hazards, early pads negating the helmet, a full para into a Hurricane miss. What is happening? Some pivoting around lets Vaporeon heals up some status in the clutch, and then the slow flip turn into Victini. Trick Room from the slow team, a shocker, but turn 15 we finally get some action with V-Create speeding up Victini in the Twisted Dimensions, takes down Metagross, takes down most of Urshifu before going down. Coco has the strong Dazzling Gleam to it, KOing Zapdos with help from Toxic. Meteor Beam Nihilego is the next threat, the coverage too strong for Vaporeon. Crawdon's great revenge tool, but Urshifu sacked instead. Now it's a Grass-type showdown with Tangrowth walling Zarude. Bulk ups, though how does Tangrowth make it through the boost and the jungle healing? It only takes a couple of Focus Blasts hitting to neutralize that threat. Horse is sacked to the Nihilego revenge, but Crawdon's Aqua Jet clean up the rest of the team. A solid 3-0 for the Agrons. The Close Combat Club looking for a more convincing victory against the Kinglers. They may just have gotten that with the 4-0 win here. Flip turn against Rain seems good, but it's not really a tool it's more so just to get Latios's Draco Meteor in, which is nearly unresisted. Some good fun with the Intimidate Quillfish, but Kinglers actually Hypercutter. Haze to stop Speed Boost with a Crab beats the Pufferfish. It was all downhill from there, though. Latios just claims KOs just about every time it comes in. Corval's the Aegislash, a risky switch into Krook and a healthy Pelipper, but it pays off to bring the Rain Setter low. Seismitoad in, Focus Punch on a Corviknight, memories. Anyways, Corval's that, plus the Kingler decently well, taking it out before allowing the Latios back in one more time to finish off the Pelipper. Last go around with Rain. Kingdra is special, though, and we all know what Blissey does to special attackers. Corv goes down to the Toad, but with the Rain Gun, it's time for Moxie knockoff Crook, who gets the final 3 KOs, finishing up the 4-0 victory. Next is the Noctowls and the Bulldors, a good test for both teams that the Noctowls pass 3-0. Early Rocks, early Defog, a burnt Hippo, but it's a special Hippo. Weather Ball hits the weaker side on Weezing, a whopping 27% to the Smokestacks. Feeny and Thundy trade damage to let Weezing defog again. Antsy almost takes down the Weezing, but takes some chip, and Hippo finally goes down in exchange for the Rocks. That lets in Rillaboom, and it's, oh no, well, no terrain, but that would have gone down to the follow-up defog anyways. Thundy is down, but Volk is setting up. A bad luck roll for the Boulders takes out Deancey, but a follow-up Surf crit brings Volcarona low and forces the switch. It's time to trade. Slowking goes down, but Cryo goes down in exchange. Feeny has a chance to do something special with Scarf Moonblast, but he doesn't take the risk on the 23% Volcarona, and it switches. Volcarona sets up a Quiver Dance, and with the remaining mons left, that will do it. A 3-0 victory for the Noctowls. Moving along to 2 teams looking for redemptions. The Steamrollers eke out a close one over the Lairon, 1-0. Early game, it looked like it was all Steamrollers. Regieleki doing over half to the Dragapult even. Scizor finishes off the Slowbro with a smart U-turn. Lando gets up Rocks and Oakos Bisharp. Dragapult misses a Draco and also goes down to Lando, but then Archeops comes back in. Stone Edge Spring Lando low should have revealed the Scarf, but the throw commences. Scizor doesn't pull a punch, he goes down to the Stone Edge crit. Lucky doesn't outspeed in his O-Code as well. What is going on? 4 more hits in a row could win it, but it misses against the Kiss and gets paralyzed. Still outspeeds Noko's the Kiss too, but Pika Power prevails and gets the revenge. Nidoking almost goes down 2 to Surf, but it's traded out. Lando cleans up, brings Melmetal to half, and the Kyurem at 61% just needs the Earth Power to do 49, and it does, saving a close battle for the Steamrollers, who get the 1-0. And finally, the Incineroar start their comeback season in Week 2 with a 5-0 victory over the Rockruff. Some early pivots and Garchomp as an early sword stance doesn't matter in the face of Clefable, who's unaware of the goings-on with the Chomp. It's a clam-mined war between it and the Glow-King, and after what happened Week 1, you'd think the Rockruff would have learned how long it would take for a poison or a crit. They did not learn, and 30 turns later, Cinderace, Moltres, Galar, Sylveon, and Garchomp are all down before the Sludge Bomb crit. A Smart Toxicon to Rotom, a Chansey that soaked Sit for days, and a D-Dance Salamence that avoided a couple of discharge paras, followed by 2 Dragon Claw crits, seal another unfortunate game for the Rockruff 5-0. And that, my friends, is what happened in Week 2. As you may have noticed, we did only go over 6 matches. That's because we did have a coach with a scheduled vacation ahead of time overseas. Hope that trip was excellent. We will be covering the Burbs and the Troopers in Week 3, so 8 matches in that week should be pretty exciting. Now, before we go into the power rankings and recaps, I do want to turn it over to Steve for a moment here to talk about some of the trades. We had quite a few. First off, Steve, we do see the Incineroar and Close Combat Club trading their Tier 20s back to each other. We saw Aeron in Week 1, didn't see either of these in Week 2, but they're just exchanging them back. Maybe it was just good for 1 week.
Yeah, I'm not sure what arrangement they had, but I know Aeron did come for the Incineroar on Week 1. Perhaps they liked that matchup that week, but just trading the 20-point Mons back. Hope maybe we'll see this continue throughout the rest of the season, where they just keep switching it up, so you never know what 20-point Mon you're preparing for until the week of.
It is just 20 points, but it is something. These 2 months could very well come again, or just be traded out. We're not sure. Next up, though, the Bulldors are addressing one of their needs too. Steve, we talked a bit about how they had 2 Steel ground types in the Excadrill and the Steelix, and also have a Powdon. Fixing it up just a little bit with a little more diversity, getting the Deancey in exchange for the Steelix, which we did see come this week.
Yep, and that is something we definitely recommended early on with Steelix kind of duplicate roles with other Mons, trying to diversify a little bit, get a different defensive piece, different typing, as well as that fairy coverage, which could be also helpful here.
And of course, the Boulders do still have 20 points remaining because they trade down from 100 to an 80, so expect at least 1 or 2 more moves following up at a later point to take advantage of that as well. Next, we've got a few trades here all at once. Steve, I'm going to let you go through all of this because the Incineroar traded out half their team this week, it sure seems like.
Yep, the Incineroar, apparently after, did not like the way Week 1 went and decided to switch a lot of things up here, trading away Jirachi, Quagsire, Entei, and Regieleki, picking up the Alakazam, Tentacruel, the recently dropped Steelix, and the Rotom Heat. Just rearranging things. From what I understand, they weren't too much of a fan of Jirachi, especially with the other kind of more Wally pieces on their team. So downgrading that to the Alakazam while also picking up some additional speed, which will make up for, of course, the missing Regieleki now. Getting a spinner in the form of Tentacruel, which I think is something they were very much looking for. Getting that Steelix now as a rock setter and key defensive piece, and maintaining kind of an electric and fire type by picking up that Rotom Heat. Lots of trades here, just looking to better fit to the playstyle they wanted and get a little more average overall Mons instead of the higher points and incredible base stats of things like Regieleki and Jirachi.
This definitely diversifies their team quite a bit. It sounds like a buzzword, but we talked a lot about how one track it almost seemed like the team was, right? How it's just big, bulky Bungus's offense. And now getting something like Alakazam to take advantage of that, that's pretty much all it will do. Quagsire, which the only thing it will do is be a big Bungus and sit there, trade out for things like the Tentacruel you can play, maybe a little more active support piece kind of thing. I do kind of like the idea of these transactions. Hope it works out for them, because that's a big change, relatively early, but it sounds like they knew what they wanted, what they want to do. So we'll see what happens. But of course, one of those months that was dropped does get immediately picked up, though. The Steamrollers trade out the T-Tar after Week 1 for the Regieleki, one of their favored Mons.
Yep. They have certainly brought Regieleki in past seasons and very much enjoyed just having that 200 speed, able to really not have to think about outspeeding things. You just do it. Hits hard, as well as offers great support and spinning and screens. T-Tar, was an early pick for them, second round, I believe. But ended up not fitting with their theme of having pivoting moves on every Mon. Doesn't quite have the bulk or recovery they would necessarily want as something without pivoting. So switching that out for pivoting, and I recall hearing after the draft, Chad specifically said his draft would have been perfect if he got Regieleki over T-Tar. So here it is, finally getting to make his team perfect, and we'll see how that works out for him.
I do like a lot of what the T-Tar provided for him, switch in for a couple of typings that may have been a little tough for him to switch into, as well as providing a little extra for the Sandris, but I definitely understand where he's coming from. Getting that extra speed, another remover that's relatively reliable should free up something like Togekiss a little bit more, make so that things like that don't have to come every week, that in the Moltres. And the strong electric type, yes, he has a Pikachu at the bottom, which actually did quite a bit of damage in his match this week. But Aleki's just a whole other level, right? The extra speed control that he wouldn't have otherwise. I do overall like it. It's just something he's more comfortable with. So shout out to Chad for this very cool move. Almost immediately after the Aleki got dropped, he knew what he wanted to do. With the trades covered, we are going to go into the power rankings reveal, and here we go. A new number 1, of course, we had the Bouffalant and Wobbuffets as basically 1A, 1B, but the Wobbuffets will remain on top, and I guess we'll start off with that match. Finally, we have some teams that aren't right next to each other, or one team that's on, one team that's off to go over, so we're covering the 1 and the 3 together here. We went over the Wobbuffets and the Bouffalant match a little bit, Steve. It certainly lifted up the hype, so much so that it is, in fact, the feature match.
Yeah, it was a really close game, 1-0 victory, but even then, coming down to, that last turn where there's the 10% para chance to put it in my edge, and even without that, there's the accuracy of Hurricane or the rolls of Hurricane or knockoff into the current HP of Thunderous. So that match was not decided until the end. Close game, and, really deserves to be that featured match.
There were a couple opportunities where I think both of us maybe made or did not make optimal plays that, honestly, it really was just so excellent. Even those not optimal plays, I think you could make a great argument as to why we did those. It seems like, just sacking Kartana for nothing. That chip was very important. Why are you setting up in front of this Hydreigon? Because one misstep and Terrakion just wins. Even just small things like that made it all kind of a complete game for sure. You'll see a whole lot more about that both on this channel from Michael and the Burps as well as my own channel where we'll be going fully in depth on it, but it certainly lived up to the hype, Steve. It's always a pleasure playing you.
Yep, and glad your week 2 curse continued.
That sure does seem to be the case. We'd love to go more in depth, but again, you'll hear so much more about it. We're just going to move on. Number 2, Agrons with a big win over the number 7 Summit County Psyducks. The Agrons continue to impress, honestly. I'm not really sure what we were expecting from them. Maybe it was just the disappointing season last season, but we kind of forget they really are regular season champs, it feels like. This is the time of the season, especially the beginning and first part of the season, where the Agrons do tend to shine. They're really showing off right now.
Yeah. Second straight week where they're coming away with impressive wins. Per preseason seeding and last season power rankings, this of course follows. But still, getting those wins against the teams that are seated close to them is an important thing. And coming out 2-0 at this point after 2 impressive wins where they certainly had control, it's great to see that.
And this is probably the second week in a row, too, where we thought, it was okay, it was a decent win. Well, actually, when you take another look at it, we see a lot more elements to Joey's gameplay that have impressed us quite a bit. Seeing how much the Coco was doing in damage, seeing the cool synergy that this Victini set had, a little bit slower set with the Trick Room to actually set up a lot of these slower mons, the way that the Tangrowth was able to handle multiple answers, even small things like seeing that the Rocky Helmet didn't go off to chip the Urshifu, so the next time Urshifu came in, he went to the Vaporeon. The cleanup crew from Crawdhunt to the end, it's starting to look a little bit more well-rounded. Still, obviously, a couple holes, but he seems to be plugging those up pretty well so far.
Yeah. You mentioned the Crawdhunt. I really want to highlight the play there. Keeping it in the back and kind of recognizing that Nihilego has a fantastic matchup into his team in general, and he really can't let it go on a tear. But, he also knows as long as Crawdhunt's alive, Nihilego can get 1 KO, and then it has to switch out or it dies. Great check piece there that just kind of stays in the back and is able to clean up at the end, really, securing him this win.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's the best matchup against everything else. Obviously, those are these rude outspeeds KOs with the grass moves, the static ability from Zapdos, it doesn't naturally outspeed anything, which is something I really love about Chronos when you can find a matchup against, say, a Slowbur or Slow King or something, you can bring it in on something outspeed so you don't have to go for Aqua Jet. But Joey did a great job breaking down all those other mons, especially with the help of Coco. I think the synergy with that is excellent. Being able to take on basically all of those threats that he was worried about trying to bring low, KOing the Metagross early, getting the Zapdos low, getting the Urshifu low, and suddenly it's just the Zarude left, and no matter how much it sets up, you just have to hit Focus Blast, or you just bring in the Dazzling Gleam on, and it does well there too. I do want to talk a little bit about the Psyducks. We'll talk about the rankings, I think, a little bit later for the Psyducks especially. Will be a little later. But they do overall have a pretty solid game plan. I liked the protective pads on the Urshifu, of course. Good job recognizing Meteor Beam there as well. Maybe a couple questionable plays with staying in on with some mons, or I think the Zarude maybe could have seen that was a losing matchup against the Tangrowth, but can't find too many faults in their game plan so far.
Yeah, you mentioned the Zarude, and, having jungle healing is a fantastic option, but healing 25% a turn against Focus Blast, which admittedly misses a lot, but it still hits roughly 70% of the time, doing 60%. Jungle healing is not going to do enough to outdo that, and, trying to PP still out the Focus Blasts there on some bad RNG is not going to work out there. At some point, you just have to cut your losses and move on to the next plan. If you can predict on a Focus Blast getting into Nihilego, free switch in, and then you kind of gain the momentum and once again force the Agrons to pick a sack. Of course, it's still 1 KO, but then you bring it into a 3v3, and you still have the Zarude to play against other matchups, and it could be quite beneficial there so that Aqua Jet doesn't just sweep everything at the end.
So really just a good job from the Victini early game to break things down to make it so that was always going to be an unfavorable matchup, which is why we give a lot of love to the Agrons. And moving on to, that's why they're ahead of our other 2-0 team, the Close Combat Club, who had another pretty solid victory. I forget if I'm wrong, their differential may in fact be the highest so far based on their first couple matches. But there were a couple strange things going on. The Hypercutter and Intimidate interaction was cute, but both really should have been the other abilities, to be frank, too. And yes, Crocodile was an awesome bring. Yes, it cleaned up at the end, but I know we were both questioning a little bit the decision to bring it in mid-game against the Pelipper and risk such a key piece.
Yeah. Crocodile going for that knockoff there against the Pelipper. Super risky move. A Pelipper Scald there, if not KOing, brings the Crocodile super low, maybe leaves it with a burn. And, John had mentioned ahead of the match that Crocodile looked like a fantastic piece. Knockoff spam, great into this team. There's, nothing here really that wants to take it, especially with the Landorus going down super early for that Intimidate. There's not any good switch-ins to knockoff. Maybe that was what led him to click it against the Pelipper, but huge risk that ended up not, working out for him. But it could have gotten much worse there.
For sure, yeah. But otherwise, it was really solid gameplay. We mentioned the Latios, and however, just about every time it came, Draco was claiming something. A little curious that we didn't see the Aegislash come in earlier for that, or have any other answers for it. Would have liked to see maybe even a little bit more offensive Aegislash, something with like close combat for the Blissey, which would be another potential switch in to the Ghost moves that were coming in against the Latios that you knew would be coming. But it's a rain team. It's so super straightforward. Chaozu at least getting 3 go-rounds with it, but I'm not really sure what else was to be expected there. Barracuda doing not as much as we expected there either, but Corviknight and Blissey do a great job tanking up. Latios firing off Dracos. It was relatively straightforward.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, having the Barracuda the whole game to threaten back in the rain, of course, being the fastest Swift Swimmer, assuming it's Swift Swim, we didn't see for sure. Maybe it was Propeller Tail for some unknown reason. But, always having that threat that I can outspeed you back is a key piece and, really kind of limits what what Michael was able to do in the rain.
And I guess we do want to take this moment then to talk about the top 4 teams in the rankings in particular and why we ordered the way that we did. Steve, we have 3 2-0 teams, so it kind of makes sense that they'd be up and near the top, but we also did slot myself, the Bouffalant, in at number 3. This could obviously be biased, but I think we have a little more solid reasoning behind it. Tell us a little bit about why we put 1 through 4 the way that we did, the undefeated teams plus myself.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked about last week, number 1 in this rankings was going to be fairly straightforward. Myself getting the win over the Bouffalant and already having wins against notable teams like the Noctowls, the Steamrollers dropping one to the Bouffalant, the Burbs dropping to the Agrons. Of the top teams in the league, I'm the only undefeated one, and with strong record so far, it felt pretty obvious there. The Agrons at 2, they have picked up some notable wins, beating the now 1-1 Psyducks, as well as beating the, as of now, 0-1 Route 1 Burbs. Between those two matches and overall their great play so far, we definitely felt they were deserving of that number 2 spot. And then when it comes down to the Bouffalant versus the Close Combat Club for that 3rd spot, the Bouffalant, of course, having a close loss, 1-0 coming down to some rolls at the end to the number 1 Wobbuffets, as well as a win over the Steamrollers. Meanwhile, the Close Combat Club does have 2 wins, but they're against 2 currently 0-2 teams in the Kinglers and the Rockruff. Just based on quality of opponent at this time, we gave the slight edge, and of course, historical performance. But giving that close edge to the Bouffalant, giving them the number 3, and then of course, still being 2-0 is impressive, and none of the other remaining teams on this list, in our opinion, did enough to outpass the 2-0 Close Combat Club, so they're sitting there at number 4.
I thought for sure it'd be because we wanted 2 through 4 to be A, B, and C, but that works for us as well. We're going to move on to the 5 and 6 teams play each other here. The Noctowls and Boulders. Boulders moving down a few spots, Noctowls making it onto the list. But for the match itself, this was a lot of fun. It looks like maybe the Noctowls learned their lesson and defogged a few times earlier. It was partially to be able to get a Charty Berry onto Volcarona. But a couple of really unfortunate missteps, too, from the Boulders, who looked like they may have had the game a couple different times, but a couple different odd mistakes kind of kept it from them.
Yeah. Overall, great game, but we did highlight some of the mistakes that the Boulders made throughout. Of course, in team building, not bringing the Grassy Surge on the Rillaboom was a pretty big deal. Having that grassy terrain there is fantastic. Gives a priority option hitting the weaker Volcarona defense, although not very effectively, but it is a last second option there. Something else we had highlighted, of course, was the Scarfini in on the Volcarona has a chance to click Moonblast against Volcarona for the win. Instead, switches out to Rillaboom to try and take the victory that way. However, Rillaboom really doesn't have much to do there either. Volcarona gets up a Quiver Dance, and once the Rillabooms get it down, Feeney's back in to try and do the job this time. But at that point, it's not fast enough. Plus, when Volcarona outspeeds and picks up the KO.
Yeah, the Grassy Terrain, it doesn't seem like it would have made too much of a difference. It would have been really nice to have in the back for the Weavile, especially, I think. I think it could survive an Ice Shard relatively comfortably. Considering that the Wheezing and Thunderous were the first ones down, the Grassy Terrain was going to benefit the Noctowls quite a bit too, so I'm not sure how much it mattered. Obviously a little bit. I do also want to talk a little bit about the DNC. I thought that was kind of cool. He actually brought 3 scarfs. We saw for sure that the Feeney and Heliolisk were scarfed, but the DNC as well, trying to take advantage of the Volcarona, and a very unfortunate roll too with Giga Drain to take that out. But Diamond Storm at that point, that would have been pretty sick, and I think that could have made the Grassy Terrain hurt a little bit more too, because that would have been one less mon that the Volcarona could have come in on and roosted up against. So man, if he had survived that hit and gotten the Diamond Storm off, we could have been talking about a whole different game just from that.
Yeah, and I mean this game had lots of those situations. That's Pokemon for you, where a one roll can change the outcome of the game, and that's just the game we play, and things like that will happen. Unfortunate that it happens. Perhaps the Noctowls would have still ended up with a win, even if the Diancie had lived there. But it is fun to look at and say, what if?
It would have been cool to see if maybe that would have even gotten a surprise KO. Something else comes into revenge, and could have gotten another surprise Moonblast. Man, look how good Moonblast looks against that team too. A good identification there to bring both of the fairy types as well. In the end, Noctowls get the W. It just makes sense for them to be ahead of the Boulders for that as well. I guess we should talk about the last couple of matches real quick here before we discuss the 5 through 8 in the power rankings here. Jet Seattle Steamrollers, of course, taking the 1-0 victory, and we don't have to spend too much time on it, but it's incredibly swingy and totally in control and then totally out of control, and then Chad was able to wrap it back up, but kind of nerve-wracking all throughout.
Yeah. Really, really nerve-wracking, especially there at the end. Archeop staring down the team, kind of slow recognition on the fact that it's Scarf, and then it sits there and would KO the whole team there with Stone Edge. Just needed to hit 6 times in a row. Got a couple, but missed on the Togekiss, who then goes for Thunderwave instead of just trying to just hit it to activate its ability to Fetus. Thunderwave, of course, does make sure it's not going to do anything ever again without a heal bell or something like that. Whereas maybe it was carrying Roost as a move to heal up if needed. But it scary moment for Chad, nearly losing it here when he had such a commanding lead at the start, but was able to pull through at the end and pick up the win.
And then the final match, the Cincinnati Incineroar taking on the New Britain Rockruff, and man, the Rockruff just cannot catch a break. Clefable is Amon. I know there are a lot of leagues that are kind of anti-Clefable, even a lot of people that are anti-Clefable, just because it's so tough to break through unaware and/or Magic Guard makes it so almost impossible to deal with. A little unlucky, obviously, trying to get the poison or try to get a crit or something in there, and some nice switching around to try and hit on the weaker physical side or get those opportunities to get the crits, but they just did not come until it was way too late.
Yeah. As discussed in the review, eventually a crit did come. Eventually Clefable did go down, but it was just way too late after losing so many members of the team, just leaving Glow, King, and Rotom versus fresh 5 on the Incineroar side. Not much they were able to do. Great read by Matt, recognizing the matchup here for Clefable, getting it at the first opportunity he saw, setting it up, and letting it go to town.
So that'll do it with those recaps there. To finish up the power rankings recap, we have quite a few 1-1 teams and even a 1-0 team there in the Wooper Troopers. So Steve, I want you to kind of tell everyone what we had talked about a little bit. We kind of the Noctowl separated a little bit at 5, 6 and 7. I thought were pretty close, and then we just barely left off the Steamrollers and the Incineroar. So tell us a little bit about our reasoning for those decisions here in the power rankings.
Right. Starting with the Noctowls, we did realistically discuss putting them into the top 4, but kind of realized that the club definitely deserved that spot more. The Noctowls, of course, having that week 1 loss to the Wobbuffets, which are now the number 1 team, as well as a win against the previously ranked number 4 team in the Boulder Boulders, but still not quite as impressive as the 2-0 Close Combat Club, so they ended up there at 5. The Psyducks and Boulders here at 6 and 7, both of them being 1-1. We gave the edge to the Boulders here. We just, in general, think their play and opposition were maybe a little stronger. Of the more impressive win against the Incineroar, whereas they also had the kind of worst loss to the closer ranked Newport Noctowls, although they are a historically stronger team. Overall, pretty close, but we decided to give the slight edge there to the Boulders. And the Troopers, we kept hanging around at 8. Of course, they haven't played their Week 2 match yet, but we didn't see, in our opinion, enough from the Steamrollers or the Incineroar to give that spot away. In the case of the Steamrollers, we just talked about their match, coming down to relying on the Stone Edge miss, and even then just squeaking out the 1-0 victory. Not really impressing anyone. Of course, they do have a loss to, one of the higher-ranked Buffalo Bouffalant teams, but as of now, keeping them off the list. I would not be surprised to see them make it onto the list in future weeks, but that's where they're at for now. And in the case of the Incineroar, starting the comeback season here, getting a good win, unfortunately against a currently 0-2 team, and of course their loss in the previous week to the Boulder Boulders kind of holding them back a little bit. And this win was really just Clefable. There wasn't too much more to it than that. It was send out Clefable and go. Good on them for identifying that win condition, but not quite enough to impress us and think that they'll be able to really climb the rest of the ranks.
And one more thing I do want to point out, the Boulders, Psyducks, very close, the 6 and 7 there. We did give a slight edge to the Boulders because we did see that the game could have been in their hands. It looked like the Agrons had a little bit more control over the Psyducks throughout the game, and we felt like there was more of an opening that the Boulders had created as opposed to the Psyducks never really being in that game, which is both a testament to the Agrons and maybe a testament to the Boulders as well, to getting at least an opportunity to be able to get back into the game. So it was that little bit of difference we did decide to move them in that direction. Of course, these flow so much week to week. We already see how many changes there have been just from the previous week, so keep your eyes open for that moving forward. And speaking of, we do have our last bit of news here, which is the Week 3 matches. Steve, which matches for Week 3 stand out the most to you that you think could have a big influence in the power rankings, or that you would like to see something from one or two of these teams?
One that stands out to me from a quick glance that we were just talking about both these teams, the Seattle Steamrollers and the Cincinnati Incineroar. Both teams we currently have just on the outside of the top 8, and with a win here, as well as presumably some of these other teams losing, either of these teams could realistically make it in with a win, and I can almost guarantee the loser will not. So that's a key matchup here for looking at the top 8. Otherwise, there are a lot of competitions here between some strong teams, of course. We had talked about how we thought about putting the Newport Noctowls in at number 4, and here they are facing up against the current number 4 Close Combat Club. So that is going to be a very close battle. Excited to see the result of that. There are a ton of others. What matches are catching your eyes?
Definitely the Wobbuffets and Burbs. Yes, the Burbs are 0-1. This is, of course, pending their Week 2 match against the Wooper Troopers, which I'm still looking forward to. It's still a good test for both of those teams. But if the Burbs can get back on track, this could be a fantastic win to catapult them back up into top contention. This is our Season 10 winner. Another one that's kind of interesting to me, the Agrons and Kanglers. Yes, it seems like weaker competition, but the Agrons starting off 3-0, not really something that we had on our radars, but that could be within their grasp. And of course, real quick, the Bouffalant and Boulders, I think, looks really nice on paper as well. Boulders just barely missing out on that win previous week, and now a chance to do it against a good team. We have not been able to play each of the last couple of times that the Boulders were in the league, so this is actually, I think, our first real matchup that we've had against each other. This could be a ton of fun. So obviously a stacked Week 3 lineup. We'll be back, of course, next week for more power rankings and recaps and reviews. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you then.